Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sam Kliger. I'm the director of Eurasian Affairs at the American Jewish Committee, and it's my pleasure to moderate this very interesting discussion, despite the fact that it's very late, and I would say good evening instead of good afternoon. Our distinguished panelists are already introduced, but I just wanted to start, giving the late hour and everybody's tired. I would like to share with you one joke that would probably introduce us to the concept of the future of the Jewish people globally. So recently, God Almighty invited 3 world leaders, Mr. Trump, President of the United States, Mr. Putin, President of Russia, and Mr. Netanyahu, who is Prime Minister, most likely Prime Minister of Israel. And he told them, the end of the world is coming, and please go prepare yourself. Well, Mr. Putin gathered his cabinet in Kremlin and said to everybody, I have 2 pieces of news for you. One is bad, and another is very bad. The bad news is that, yes, God exists. And the second part of news is very bad. The end of the world is coming. Please go and prepare yourself. Then Mr. Trump gathers his cabinet and tells his guys, I have 2 pieces of news for you. One is bad, another one is good. The good news is that God exists, and the bad news, the end of the world is coming. Prime Minister Netanyahu gathered his cabinet and said, I have 2 pieces of news for you. One is yes, one is the good, and another one is very good. The good news is that, yes, God exists. The very good news is that the Palestinian state will never exist. So, with this notion of the future, we don't have prophets in this room, but we have our distinguished panelists who will discuss the future of the Jewish people without jokes and without the notion that the end of the world is coming. That's why I will invite first Mark Levin to start this wonderful discussion.
Previous speakers have left their notes for me. First, I want to thank the organizers of the conference and those who have worked so hard to put the program together. I think it's a very comprehensive effort to show the complexity of issues that confront not just the Ukrainian Jewish community, but the our entire diaspora and the state of Israel. And there are far too many individuals to acknowledge alone. So I will give a collective thank you to so many of you in the audience who've devoted so much of your professional and personal lives to helping make a better life for Jews around the world. And again, I see many of my friends here, and we don't say thank you enough. So I want to start by saying thank you, and I want to begin. I want to try to be succinct because we have other speakers, and I hope we can engage in a conversation with the audience and among my fellow panelists. But let me start. On May 2nd, we commemorated the Holocaust by observing Yom HaShoah. Throughout the week, many of us remembered the worst tragedy in Jewish history in the modern era, participating in ceremonies, organized by the Jewish community and by our national governments that recall the devastation of those terrible years. In historical terms, the Holocaust was a short time ago. In the time since these tragic events have occurred, it's amazing to see how much success the world Jewish community has enjoyed. The organized Jewish community today is strong, as I said, well organized, for the most part well funded, and we've achieved influence in most of the countries of the world where we have a significant presence. Our ties to Israel are also strong. We have close ties to the governments where we live, and our advocacy efforts are respected and for the most part successful. Jews excel and are prominent in all professions: medicine, business, academia, diplomacy, government, and every other kind of work. 6% of the House of Representatives in the United States Congress are Jewish. The recent estimates put the world Jewish population at close to 15 million. Over 8 million live in the diaspora and over 6.5 million live in Israel. Now, if you talk to our enemies and the people who don't like us that much, you would think that we're 10 times that size. And the reason I mention these figures is that because when you think about it, 14, 15 million people that make up how many billions in the world, and yet we've contributed so much to the world, and at the same time we've been vilified by so many around the world. It's really something to think about, that such a small population has had such an impact. Nevertheless, we're faced with a major contradiction, and that's the resurgence of global anti-Semitism and attacks in contrast with the strength and expertise our communities and organizations have developed in recent years. It's a challenge for all of us. It's a challenge for everyone in this room. It's a challenge for everyone outside of this room. As CEO of NCSEJ, and for those that aren't familiar with the initials, it's the National Coalition Supporting Eurasian Jewry. I'm very familiar with these challenges. I've worked many years on behalf of Jewish communities in the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, and now dealing with the independent countries in the region. Our organizations, our communities have shown resiliency and strength. We couldn't have done this alone. We've done this in partnership with many non-Jewish groups. If I'm looking at the future of Global Jewry, on one hand, I'm very optimistic. On the other hand, I'm very pessimistic. Now, Sam began with a joke. Now, for the Americans in the audience, you'll appreciate this more than not, but I hope you'll get the understanding of this. And the reason I said one hand and the other hand is because when President Truman was in office in the 1950s in the United States, he had a very famous, at the time, economist who was his chief economic advisor named Leon Kaiserling. And Leon Kaiserling's nephew actually was my predecessor when I was the director of the Washington office at NCSEJ. So I take his word for the truthfulness of this story. Leon Kaiserling, President Truman's chief economic advisor, came in to advise the president on a particular issue of difficulty, and he said to him, "Mr. President, on one hand you can do 1, 2, and 3. On the other hand, you can do 4, 5, and 6. And there was a pause, and President Truman looked at his chief economic advisor and said, "Leon, I need to get a one-handed economist." That's the state we're in. We have reached unprecedented heights as we approach the second decade, the third decade of the 2000s, and yet, as I said before, we're confronting unimaginable challenges. One thing is that I know for sure in terms of the future of the diaspora and the state of Israel is that, and we've heard this message throughout the morning and the afternoon, is that when we act together, we can defeat any enemy. When we are divided, and when we argue among ourselves to the degree that it's destructive, then the future of our diaspora, the well-being of the state of Israel, is in great jeopardy. And my plea is that at this time, when our communities are under unprecedented attacks, unimaginable. I mean, I'm standing here as an American and as a Jew, and never would I have thought that we would have witnessed the mass murder of Jews in my country. I always thought it would happen somewhere else, or it did happen somewhere else. So I can't stand before you and say that it won't happen again. But what's important is the outpouring of support that we as American Jews received from our fellow Jews around the world and from Israel when these attacks occurred. We stood united, but what's needed is not standing united in the face of tragedy. It's needed in promoting and protecting the interests of all Jews around the world. And that's the challenge for all of us moving forward. It's not holding hands in times of only tragedy. It's looking for ways of preventing those tragedies. It's working together to strengthen our communities, to ensure that our institutions and our communities are protected. It's been my life's work. It's been the work of our organization. For those that don't know, I think we may have the largest international delegation participating in this conference, and I think that should be a signal to everyone of our ongoing commitment to working with the Jewish communities in the former Soviet Union, in Eastern Europe, and to ensure the viability of these communities, to ensure the safety and well-being, and and I want to finish with this, is that I've been doing this for almost 4 decades now. And if you would have told me a number of years ago that I would be standing before an active and engaged Ukrainian Jewish community in the middle of Kyiv, talking about vibrant Jewish life at the same time that a president was elected who is Jewish, I would have said, "You're crazy." It was beyond my wildest imagination. But here we are. And we're here because as Jews, we dream. And we not only dream, we put our dreams into action. And that's why I remain an optimist with a healthy dose of pessimism as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Being honored by Boris Loshing's presence, I would like to echo what Mark just said when you were out. And he said that, well, he wants to thank you very much and the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine for organizing such an important and very high-level conference. Like the Kyiv Jewish Forum, and we do hope that this conference will continue and the tradition is here, and it's very important to have it every year if possible, of course. Thank you, Mark, and of course in 45 minutes we cannot decide the future of the Jewish people. But in 45 years, those of you who will still be around will be able to see the future of the Jewish people. With that in mind, I would invite next speaker, Lord Mendelsohn, who is a member of Parliament, of British Parliament, to address the issue of the future of the Jewish people. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I would like very much to thank Boris Lozhin and the Jewish Confederation of the Ukraine for the invitation to come here this evening. It's a huge pleasure also to be here to be able to celebrate the work of the Jewish Confederation of the Ukraine and to be part of its events here. I just wanted also just to thank the previous speaker. I thought he made a very powerful contribution and deeply personal, and I thought his observations on what's happened in Ukraine were very thoughtful and very precise. I'm a member of the House of Lords. I'm a member of Parliament in the United Kingdom. I sit on the Labour Party benches. But I'm also the president of the Commonwealth Jewish Council, the umbrella body for Commonwealth Jewry, encompassing some of the major Jewish communities, United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, South Africa, as well as a large number across Africa, the Caribbean, the South Pacific, and other places as well. And it's from here that I wish to sort of raise a few issues about the state of the Jewish world and my observations on the global Jewish community. Not least because in some of these countries we have tremendously small Jewish communities, perhaps numbering 50. I think in the most famous of our communities, which we're trying to do some work to heal, there are some 60 Jews and 4 different factions, and it gives you some sense in which the Jewish community has a terrible capacity to live up to its own humour in its ability to divide. But our job has to be to look forward to a bright Jewish future. And we start from the point of a golden age. We do have, indeed, at this moment, a quite tremendous age of Jewish life. What has been rebuilt since the Holocaust, what has been built by communities, the sorts of institutions, the sorts of vibrant Jewish life, relationships with the external world, all of these are a tremendous sense of achievement and a tremendous joy to the Jewish world. Additionally, the existence and achievements of Israel in and of itself demonstrates what an extraordinary time that we are in and what, by dint of the efforts of many people, has been achieved. However, we're always one to kvetch and quibble, and so we always feel that there can be a better future, and it's not without some reason that we have a view that the global Jewish future has some challenges. There are many trends that we have to face. The demography, which is that the diaspora is reducing in size, whilst Israel's Jewish population is increasing in size. This has a huge reflection. We have the increasing urbanization of the Jewish world. Major cities, I think it's just Tel Aviv and New York alone, account for some 25% of the entire Jewish population of the world. And we have a thinning out of the long tail of Jewish community presence across many parts of the world. We are faced and buffeted by many trends in the world: globalization, issues around the family, also issues around the way in which politics changes. Not just the global pattern of where powers lie, but also some of the challenges about renewing democracy for this age. We also have many external threats, which we know to be realistic. Anti-Semitism, which many had hoped had left this planet some time ago, has always found a very sticky way of remaining. And it's not just the challenges from the right and some of the more emergent challenges infused by European anti-Semitism that emerge in the Muslim world, but the anti-Israelism, which is no more than anti-Semitism, and actually something which I think people should recognize more, which is that the political left, the tradition that I'm from, also has a very deep and burning history of entrenched anti-Semitism within it. So I give you, over the next period, just a very short staccato view of some of the challenges we have to face up to. Naturally, we have to face up, firstly, to the challenges of Israel-diaspora relations, this constant sense of how we build a constant bridge between Israel and the diaspora, and how we come to terms with the fact that Israel will have to take on a greater responsibility for the diaspora itself. As the numbers change, as the balance change, as the diaspora becomes less opportune for people outside a religious tradition, the secular tradition will exist long in Israel. We have to think about how we renew that, how we build that, and how we constantly develop some sort of relationship. Number two, Israel has to face up to the reality that it has a huge responsibility for the rest of the Jewish world in content as well as in security, and it has to deal with that in a most sensible way. And I think the words of Ronald Lauder, who has said this on many occasions before, but as I understand said it this morning as well, that Israel's political decisions about the future of how it defines Jewry, who is a Jew and other sorts of matters, also need some very careful consideration and with a real view to the long term. We also have to take a view as to what sort of Jewish life that we really want in the long term. Not today, not tomorrow, but in the long term. It is certainly true that the future of people on the margins of Jewish identification, in small communities, traditional Orthodox Jews, Jews of some of the progressive communities who haven't found a way to renew intergenerationally, in some of the secular communities. If we really want to retain these groups as Jews, we have to face up to a number of different actions. There are certain communities which will be resilient. Israel will remain resilient. Orthodoxy will remain resilient. Ultra-Orthodoxy will remain resilient. But the other communities, by looking at any trend and any measure, are ones which we need to spend some effort to. And we need to be determined that those are things that we want to do. Fourth, if we wish to act, then we have to have a different view and a different commitment to a broad sense of definition of Jewish identity and Jewish purpose. It is not enough to define it narrowly as we have done before. As the world changes, as families change, as people's identity changes, as diversity changes, as people's expectations change, we have to change the way in which we consider who can be accommodated in this Jewish world. We also, secondly, have to consider the place of women. It is no longer enough for Orthodox women to feel part of the community when the world is moving on apace and we are not. We have to address this reality. And we have to address more sympathetically the reality of who is a Jew. I'm a strong proponent that we need to change the way in which we do conversion. To me, it's nothing short of a disgrace as I travel across Africa to the many, many thousands of people who wish to identify as Jew, that I can't take the feeling that some of these communities are denied the opportunity to be officially recognized as Jews just because they are black and live in Africa. It is an absolute disgrace. We have to change the way that we view conversion, full stop. And it's not just across those communities. There is no logical sense why there are only 50 people going through Orthodox conversion in the United Kingdom when there are 700 in Paris. We have to have a stronger view about how we embrace people who are Jewish. Fifthly, we have to have a new leadership and a new ethos. We have to embrace, we have to think about the issues that are the challenges of the common civilization, the very best of Jewish values, issues like climate change and others, as well as our own strength and internal cohesion as a community. I also think that we have, sixthly, to understand very, very strongly what are the interventions that have been so successful for the Jewish life over many years may not be the ones that will come forward. We have to think about place, and we have to think about community. Most importantly, we have to think about the home. It is no accident in research that the home is the single biggest determinant of a Jewish future. And therefore, we have to think of interventions which support that. We've gone long on things which we think can help, schools and other sorts of things. They all have shortcomings. We have to think about we identify more with place, with opportunity, with people, and with building community. That means a revolution for our synagogues, turning them all into community centres and places. We have to do those things. And finally, I think we have to understand that we can be our own worst enemies, and we have to think long-term about our future. It is not always possible for some. I come from the United Kingdom, where, and I heard Ambassador Itamar Rabinovich earlier, I thought give a rather kind press to Jeremy Corbyn as a leader who wasn't able to deal with his anti-Semitism. We have a political leader who is an anti-Semite, who comes from a faction with anti-Semitism at its very core, and who presents a major challenge to the Jewish community and to the Jewish world. Actually, their biggest supporters in Britain come from two factions, the highly progressive Jews and the Satmar Hasidim, who see an opportunity to get narrow advantage, a mistaken calculation in my view. This isn't the case. We have to think long-term in everything we do, and we have to find ways in which we can reach out to all the extremities of the Jewish world if we're to build a Jewish future. That, I believe, is our long-term challenge. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Mendelsohn, for presenting a number of challenges to the audience. But as we all know, challenges give birth to opportunities. So we will hope that we will find opportunities for next 45 years of Jewish life globally. Our next speaker is Ambassador Kuchler from Germany, German Foreign Office, who will present us with a number of other challenges. Please, Madam Ambassador.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank the Ukrainian Jewish Confederation for having organized this event and for having having invited me to this important forum. I am grateful and I feel honored that as a representative from Germany, I can speak to this distinguished public. In 2 years, we will celebrate in Germany 1,700 years of presence of Jews in my country. 1,700 years of flourishing Jewish life, of great contributions of Jews to German society, but also of discrimination, ghetto, expulsion, scapegoating, anti-Semitism, culminating in the greatest break of civilization the world has ever seen, the Holocaust, the Shoah. When I came here this morning, I saw the small exhibition on Jewish life in Kyiv before World War II, on Babi Yar and other places of mass executions. Things that never ever should have happened. Every German is going to feel forever ashamed about what has happened in the years 1933 to 1945. And I can assure you that Germany and Germans know about their responsibility that arises from murdering millions of Jews. In 1933, 500,000 Jews were affiliated to a Jewish community in Germany. In 1950, there were 15,000 Jews. Today, around 120,000 Jews in Germany are affiliated to a Jewish community. It is estimated that another 100,000 Jews live in Germany without belonging to a community. Biggest communities are in Berlin with around 10,000 members, Munich 9,000, Düsseldorf 7,000, with a very strong link to Czernowitz here in Ukraine, and Frankfurt, around 6,000 members. The German federal government tries to foster Jewish life in Germany. You will perhaps know that Germany is organized in federal states. We have 16 federal states who have their own competency for culture, for police, for justice. They, of course, have means and measures and tools to foster Jewish life within their territory. But at the federal level, the federal government is doing also, is trying to foster Jewish life in Germany. For instance, I would like to mention the support for the Central Council of Jews and other Jewish organizations with around 15 million euros per year. This serves to contribute to a pluralistic Jewish landscape. Like, for instance, as I already mentioned, the Central Council for Jews, the Leo Baeck Institute, the International Auschwitz Committee, the University for Jewish Studies, the Abraham Geiger College, or the Union of Progressive Jews. we are proud that we can offer religious education for Jewish students also at state schools. This contributes a lot to creating Jewish identity, especially for those young students whose parents or grandparents came to Germany after 1990 from the former Soviet Union, and who usually don't have a very strong Jewish identity. Through the religious education at state schools, we try to create this identity. A new development is the acceptance of rabbis within the armed forces for Jewish soldiers and of officers in need of support. On the international level, we are an active member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. Germany will take on the presidency of the IRA as from next March on, so from the year 2020 to 2021. I heard this morning with great interest that Ukraine is going to deposit a written application for becoming a member of IRA, and we are looking forward to it, and we will do our utmost to make it come true as soon as possible. Holocaust remembrance plays a major role in Germany in prevention of anti-Semitism. This is true mainly for education, which means education at schools, at universities, but also education within the police forces, within the armed forces, within the justice bodies, and especially for teachers. In my unit, which I represent at the Federal Foreign Office, we have some projects also here in Ukraine. One consists in identifying sites of mass executions and giving them a dignified monument. Another one consists in supporting Yahad in Unum, which you certainly know. And a third project, which is dear to my heart, is protecting Jewish cemeteries, fencing and protecting Jewish cemeteries in need. We also do projects here in Ukraine in education. We try to contribute to Jewish communities, mainly in Western Ukraine, like Bukovina or Galicia, to adopt the German identity of this region by translating texts that originally were written in German by, for instance, Paul Celan or Rose Ausländer or Nelly Sachs, who were born in that region, and translating them into Ukrainian and making them such part of Ukrainian Jewish identity. The fight against anti-Semitism is one of the main priorities of the German government. In the next year, Germany will not only assume the presidency of IRA, but also in the second half of the year, the presidency of the European Union, and as from November on, the presidency in the Committee of Ministers of the European Council. In all these three fora, we are going to make the fight against anti-Semitism a priority. This forum is about the future of Jewry in the world. I talk to you about the presence of fostering Jewish life in Germany. And to conclude, let me be very clear that it goes without saying that the future of Jewry throughout the world can only exist if Jews can live in peace and security wherever they are. Germany will do its utmost to contribute to that goal. And I personally, I have a dream. I have a dream that one day synagogues, Jewish schools, Jewish kindergartens, other Jewish institutions will not need police protection or any other kind of security anymore, that they can live without that in a free world, in a liberal world, where religions are part of our daily life. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Ambassador, for the beautiful, interesting perspective from German Foreign Office. And our next speaker, last but not least, is Levin Saltiel, who is the representative of World Jewish Congress to the United Nations. The podium is yours.
Thank you so much, and I would like to echo the rest of my panelists in congratulating the organizers for this amazing event that started today in Kyiv, and I hope has many years of life ahead of it. It's a great honor to speak at this conference among so many distinguished speakers. It's most fitting that this session comes out of after the session on the demographic challenges. Of course, we cannot have the future of global Jewry if we don't have the numbers. So this panel rightfully comes after it, and we have to focus on the future of the global Jewry from an international perspective. So in that sense, I would like to keep my presentation very concrete and focus on three themes as they relate to the work of the World Jewish Congress and my work in particular. First, I would like to speak about the United Nations. I'm honored to represent the World Jewish Congress, two bodies where the State of Israel and the Jewish people have a rather complicated relationship. First is the UN Human Rights Council in Geneva and UNESCO in Paris. For example, the Council passes more resolutions against Israel compared to any other country in the world. And UNESCO recently put in doubt the Jewish connection with Jerusalem. As you know, the US has walked out of the Human Rights Council because of this anti-Israel bias, and the US, together with Israel, walked out of UNESCO for similar reasons. While we understand 100% and respect this stance, we have taken the conscious decision to remain active in these bodies and continue the fight. We expose and condemn these biases and stand with the US and Israel in urging the UN bodies to return to their true mandates. At the same time, we consider the UN and its agencies as the most important international organization in the world. It has a unique mandate to promote human rights, peace, and security. Therefore, we're engaging with those UN actors who are willing to do the right thing. For example, we're working with the Human Rights Council and its experts to convince them to do more on anti-Semitism and bring it forward to the international agenda. I'm glad that some steps to this direction are currently taking place. With UNESCO, we have a partnership with them with several programs to fight anti-Semitism and promote Holocaust education. It is vital for the future of global Jewry to be an equal partner of the UN system and engage with governments, UN agencies, civil society, academia, and the media in the top global level on all the issues on the international agenda, such as the international refugee crisis, the plight of religious minorities, access to education for all, the prevention of violent extremism, and the global promotion of human rights. The second point I would like to speak about is anti-Semitism. And I refer to it mostly in the sense of feeling welcome, safe, comfortable, and confident in the countries we live in. After all, anti-Semitism is nothing new. It has plagued the Jews and the world for many millennia, currently threatening not only the Jewish communities, but most importantly, our open societies, our democratic culture, and the rule of law. In this respect, the World Jewish Congress is investing heavily in education, with a conscious long-term perspective, not only about the Holocaust and anti-Semitism, but also presenting the positive Jewish experience and the Jewish contribution to the world through the arts, culture, literature, science, business, and so on. We also work in the diplomatic level to condemn anti-Semitism whenever it shows its ugly face, raise awareness, create coalitions and partnerships to fight it. Last but not least, we work to increase the security of Jewish institutions worldwide, train the staff and monitor the threats, to reduce the possibility of attacks that unfortunately we're witnessing all too often. My last point is youth, which of course is the future of World Jewry, the next generation. In this respect, the World Jewish Congress commenced in 2006 a truly innovative program called the Jewish Diplomatic Corps. It's comprised currently of over 300 promising, dedicated young professionals who undergo rigorous training in diplomacy and international relations. They hail from more than 50 countries on 6 continents and speak dozens of languages. The WJC JD Corps ensures that Jewish communities around the world have a voice in global affairs, both today and for the decades to come. The mission of this program is to build, strengthen, and empower a new generation of outstanding Jewish professionals by providing them with the skills, experience, confidence, and network needed to impact diplomacy, public policy, and Jewish interest in international affairs. In addition, the JD Corps is a leadership program aiming to secure a robust future for our Jewish communities worldwide. 2/3 of its members already hold at least one position of lay leadership in their local communities, and I'm happy that some members are also present in the conference today. To conclude, for the World Jewish Congress, these issues are really at our DNA, as we are the only truly global organization representing Jews and Jewish communities in more than 100 countries around the world. So the safety and prosperity of the Jewish communities is our raison d'etre. We work hard to create alliances, influence government policies, inform the media and the public, secure our communities, and train future leaders. Our answer to the challenge is one word: unity. This is our strategy and long-term goal, our way of confronting the challenges ahead and offering a long-term future for Global Jewry. And I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Leon, and all the presenters of the distinguished panel. We were asked to wrap up by 6, so we have about 7 to 8 minutes for questions. 5, okay, whatever. Please.
I have a question for Lord Mendelsohn. Which Jewish community do you think is going to be thriving more in 25 or 30 years? The Jewish community of Ukraine or the Jewish community of Britain?
Good question.
It's a great question. I think the key point that I was making was not a national one. I'll answer the question in a second. The key point I was making was about the different strands and brands of different forms of Judaism and how they might exist. So I think it's very easy to say that within the context of both the Ukraine and the United Kingdom, there are very intense communities who will find a way to thrive and develop. My broader point was about the notion of Jewish peoplehood and the reason for having wider confederations and the sorts of things that we do. So I think that was the underlying point, and I'm sorry if I made it sort of in any way seem something which was a transnational thing, but I think that's the very important point that we have to face up to over the next period. Certainly, looking at what we've witnessed here, we can see that Ukraine has a very fine future. And actually, very recently, I was the chairman of a synagogue, and in building a new synagogue, the inspiration, if you're looking for where to build great synagogues, Ukraine's not a bad place to look. So the United Kingdom has already been looking to Ukraine in recent times. But the Jewish community in Britain faces a very uncertain future and a very difficult future. And it has two futures. It all depends on what happens in the United Kingdom and the prospects for the British Labour Party as to how a number of different sections. So without wishing to hoist myself to predicting the future, which I'm not empowered to do, it could be better, it could be worse. Time will tell. But within that, particular communities will face very different futures, and that's the thing that I think we need to be energized about.
Thank you. Any other question? Young lady.
Огромное спасибо за прекрасную конференцию.
Deputy Club Parliament and the magazine People's Deputy. Last in my past, I've been the producer of the architect Ignashenko, and the architect was the author of the monument to Babi Yar. So, well, for the certain period of time, we had the movie Spell Your Name, and there was a kind of a special invested from Spielberg, and then Spielberg visited Ukraine. And I also would like to say that the very important community, Jewish community, is Hollywood. I think that's a specific community, Hollywood community, and I think the celebrities to be invited for this Jewish forum would be very helpful, because it will be like hooked the rest of the world. I think it's not the question, it's kind of a recommendation, but it's not the panel, it's to the organizers. So you can ask the organizers.
Question was, that was a request to invite more celebrities, as if we don't have enough celebrities in this room. Thank you. Any other? Yes, sir.
Jan Privorovsky, journalist in Kyiv. Today was in Babi Yar. Can you explain some words about your impression from tour to Babi Yar? Thank you.
Thank you. Yesterday, I had the pleasure. You took me on a small tour to Babi Yar. I mean, pleasure. It's a difficult word in these circumstances. It's last week I was in Krakow. I attended the March of the Living, so I was in Auschwitz, and then I came here to Kyiv, and I visited Babi Yar. And while in Auschwitz you still see the buildings, the infrastructure of death, in Babi Yar you see nothing. You see trees, you see flowers. It's springtime. It's a beautiful park. So it's the absence in Babi Yar that's more striking, and because of the absence, everything plays out in your head, which makes the experience very, very troubling for someone who comes there for the first time. So I'm really happy that I hear that there are many efforts here to create museums and centers, educational centers, and Holocaust centers for Babi Yar, because it's important to commemorate this event. It's really tragic what happened.
Let me add something, a little bit of context. When the Soviet Union existed, the Soviet government built a monument far from the actual site of the massacres. And I'll be polite and call it a monstrosity of a memorial for one simple reason. It didn't have one mention of Jews. And to show you how things have evolved and to demonstrate partnerships, with the implosion of the Soviet Union, the first post-Soviet commemoration at Babi Yar was in 1991. And if anyone was in Kyiv in 1991, you would have been shocked at the difference in how the new Ukrainian government observed the commemoration of Babi Yar versus its predecessor. In 1991, for the first time, you could go across the streets of the main boulevards in the city and see banners proclaiming the commemoration of this event. And in the 28 years since, successive governments have tried to figure out how best to memorialize what took place. And not that it culminated, but some of us were here a few years ago when the government, for the first time, held the official event at the actual site of the massacres at Babi Yar. And since then, there's been a rehabilitation of the site. And I think that shows the partnership between the government, its Jewish citizens, and the Jewish diaspora and the state of Israel. Because I think if anybody who visits there today, at least you get a sense of the tragedy that took place. And with a little bit of luck and a great deal of hope, there should be an appropriate museum that will be built in the next few years that will tell the full story of Babi Yar and will help to make future generations understand what happens when people are indifferent.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Leon. One more question, last one. Sir?
My name is Matthias Richter. I'm a representative of a Jewish community of Düsseldorf and the German-Ukraine project Simose Pamitat. Of course, I have a question to Mrs. Kuchler. We are both German. And she said some very touching thing about the question and the dream that schools and kindergartens, детский сад, will not be saved by police in future. I can tell you that in Ukraine, schools, Jewish schools and Jewish kindergartens are free of that police security. Like we in Düsseldorf, we had some years ago this horrible bomb attack on our kindergarten, so we know what it means. So my question is, what can Germany, what can France, and what can Europe do for the future, not only of the past? Because Babi Yar was everywhere, we know that. Babi Yar was in Kamenets-Podilsky, in Kherson, in Kharkiv, and so on. So what can Germany and France do in future for the Jewish life in Ukraine? Thank you.
Well, obviously, I cannot speak. Obviously, I cannot speak for France. Thank you. Obviously, I cannot speak for France. I will only speak for Germany. I would like to refer to the IRA definition of anti-Semitism, which was adopted by the German federal government in 2017. It's not a legal text, but it's a political commitment, and we are working very hard to make it, to bring it to application in all institutions which are relevant for the fight against anti-Semitism, which means working closely with the authorities at the federal state level. We will create now a commission composed of all the special envoys for the fight against anti-Semitism at federal level and at the level of the 16 federal states that will soon come into force, and that would help apply the definition of IRA through trainings of judges, trainings of policemen, trainings of teachers, namely. I think it's a permanent task, starting already in kindergarten and not ending with end of school, but a task of lifelong learning about what is anti-Semitism and how can it change its face, because it's quite constantly changing, and that's the great challenge, to detect anti-Semitism under the different masks it can wear. And we will strive to guarantee that at federal, state level, and at the level of the Federal Republic of Germany.
Thank you very much. Let's all again thank the panelists for the beautiful presentations, and we are looking forward into the future of the Jewish people.
Thank you very much, and double applause for Mr. Kliger, who was not only a very interesting discussion participant, but also a very good moderator. Thank you. Now, we have heard, we have asked, we have listened. Now is the final touch of today's work, where you will hear but will not ask, because those are closing remarks. And who is better to start the closing remarks as Rabbi Yaakov Dov Bleich.
Thank you very, very much. I think that I'll echo the sentiment of everyone in the room, because everyone who was brave enough to stick around here until now must have been having a great time. Nobody is getting paid to be here. At least I hope not. And nobody is here just because they want their picture taken, because they could have done that in the morning. So I think that I can echo the sentiment and thank our president, Boris Loshkin, who, like I said earlier, had this vision for today's forum. And since he's a man who doesn't only dream, but as I said last night, he's also not sleeping and he's working, so he was able to win us all over with an unbelievable success of a forum bringing together world Jewish leaders, world Jewish thinkers, world Jewish speakers, great panels, great panelists, great speeches, very, very interesting topics. And Boris, we're beginning to believe that you may be able to pull off your Jewish Davos in Kyiv every year. We're really beginning to believe it. So thank you everybody really for participating, for coming, for being here, for sticking it out. And I really hope that we're going to have an enjoyable dinner and then continue on tomorrow morning. So thank you very, very much. I'll finish with one rabbinic word because I can't go away. My mother doesn't let. My mother always tells me, if you're a rabbi, you have to say something from Torah every time you get up to speak. I just want to say that we, the Jewish world, began on this past Sabbath to learn the Pirkei Avot, the ethics of our fathers, Izuchenya Nashech Hatzov, which is part of the Mishnah. The first perek, the first part that we study, if you read through it, it goes through 10 different pairs of Jewish leaders. 10 pairs of Jewish leaders who were each one removed from the other by one generation. The first generation were the ones that came back to Israel after the Galut in Bavel, after the Jews were in diaspora in Babylonia, to rebuild the second temple. These were the ones, Anshe Knesset HaGdolah. They were the ones, Ludi Velike Sabrania it was called. They came to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And what do they speak about? They speak about Heva Metunim Badin, not to be judge others, Hamidu Talmidim Harbe, make many students, V'asu Siyag LaTorah, and see to make as many fences so that people shouldn't fall. When you go back, you go to the next generation, everyone's saying something else. At the end, we'll come back to the beginning. Ehavu et hamishpat. You should make sure that you have good laws. Don't be corrupt. Be truthful. All the things that seemingly we saw at the beginning. And the answer is that every generation has its challenges. There are so many different things that we go through. And when you go through them, if you look at them in the context of the generation that they were said, it will blow your mind. It marvels historically how the generations moved and their challenges. I think that today we saw a development of a community for our generation. You know, the previous generation dealt with Soviet issues. The generation right after the breakup of the Soviet Union, they dealt with the post-Soviet issues. We today in Kyiv and throughout the Jewish world are dealing with a new generation, new issues, new challenges, new security issues, anti-Semitism issues, Jewish identity issues. And today I think that we addressed those issues of our generation. People from all over the world, different communities, everybody has their own challenges, but we were able to, under your leadership, bring them together, Boris, so that everyone spoke about the same things, that people from different communities speaking about the same things. And I think that's a great accomplishment, and congratulations to you, our president, congratulations to the Jewish Confederation of Ukraine, Ukrainian Jewish community, and to all of the participants in this wonderful, wonderful forum. Memorable, and I think that we'll remember it for a very long time. Дякую вам.
Hard to speak about after such a wonderful orator, because you have to say something at least as meaningful as he had. But I do have something meaningful to say, because the closing remarks go to Mr. Hennady Verbelenko. And here he is, and I ask you to be very attentive.
Thank you. Уважаемые члены.
Dear members of Jewish communities, dear guests of Forum, for us it's a great honor, especially for the Memorial Center of Holocaust, to become a partner of this very fantastic event. So we are very thankful to Jewish Confederation, Mr. Boris Loshkin, for organizing this forum, and no doubt we cannot, touch the partnership so well, and we become a partners. And why we become the partners of this forum? First of all, because we do have the common things, we do have the common statements, and the common statements is within our mission tasks, and it's become our goals and the tasks of our forums. First of all, that's the counterparting anti-Semitism and the process of memorizing of the memory, and the anti-Semitic activity for the first time is not obvious at the first glance, but we should remember in IRA, according with the statement of IRA, they remember Holocaust and not to take into consideration the Holocaust and forgetting the Holocaust is the main expression of anti-Semitism. So we'll just to pay the attention to Babi Yar, first of all, that's the very important thing. So we paid special attention to the Babi Yar memorial. So memorialization of this subject is extremely important. We are working in Ukraine for 3 years already, and the process of memorization or the memory process is absolutely obvious in our society. The society, business, etc., they are changing the attitudes to the process of keeping the memory. For us, Ukraine, a very sensitive subject, very sensitive issue, and we understand that this state of Ukraine is a kind of a changing to become the participant of this process, but the really scale or the influence of Holocaust is the very important thing. So Babi Yar is located inside of the heart of Ukraine, in the central part of Ukraine, and for us, for the majority of Ukrainian people, Babi Yar is something, the farthest thing, something quite different. So, and we have to change these attitudes, and for our goal is to establish the institution of the global level. So, and we're going to establish not just the specific memorial without words. We call it silent memorial. It's not only about this, but it's a kind of awareness about the threats we have in the world, and the threats and the risks of the threats quite high, and the history, unfortunately, has the tendency to again copy the event. So, I want to say that 10,000 civilians were died from the aggressions from the side of the Russian Federation. So 5-6 years, it was very hard to imagine. So it was even hard to even think about that. So, and for us, we need to get rid of the injustice things. About 80 years had been passed from since the events of the Holocaust. So in many countries, even in that countries where they had no Holocaust events, but they still do have the museums and memorial centers. And in Ukraine, where Holocaust was absolutely dangerous development. So unfortunately, we do not have the institution devoted to the Holocaust. And for right now, we have the chance to create this center together with a lot of efforts, common efforts. We can do it. And that's absolutely a real task, a real goal. So you know that we had lots of approaches to keep this memorial and to keep this process of memorizing the events. And we had this opportunity to really make the incredible progress. So we got the support from the authorities, we got the support from the mayor of the city, and the mayor of the city became one of the initiators of this project. So we got the support from different profile institutions. So lots of events were realized from our side, from our fund. So we're very happy that we do have lots of representatives of science and business to join us. And now we're in the process of absolutely incredible architectural competition. So we have 165 international architectural bureau applied to participate in this competition. So from 36 countries of the world, and so we choose 5 final participants, and until the end of July they would offer us the results of their work, and the international jury will choose the winner, and then we can show you the concept or architectural solution of this memorial, and then we will install this near the place where the massacre was. And I hope that together with the common efforts our task will be reached, and in the year 2023 I hope that it will be logically finished to do it. I think it's the 5th forum. The 5th forum, let's say it will be the 5th Jewish forum, and it would be great to hold this forum there in Babi Yar. So we want to realize this idea, and I wish success and successful work to Kyiv Jewish Forum. And I want to invite you. And you know, we have the so-called moving exhibition about Babi Yar. So that's a lot of information about our projects, and it's a kind of a traveling, moving exhibition. So this exhibition was presented in the Parliament of Great Britain, and this exhibition attracted lots of interest among the British members of Parliament.